Mm. So I'm very, very full of joy to be here with my dear friend Madeleine. Yeah, Madeleine and I have known each other for maybe 10 years, and kind of are both friends and collaborators. And one of the threads that really kind of unites us is kind of yeah, the how we relate with trauma in ways that are deeply transformative. And so it was kind of a no-brainer for me when when as things fall apart kind of revealed itself as wanting to happen. It was a no-brainer to kind of reach out to dear Madeleine and yeah, invite you to come and co-guide the first module, becoming trauma attuned, with me. So yeah, this feels like a really wonderful opportunity. I would love just to hear from you, kind of like, you know, what is it that you feel kind of really interested to be kind of unraveling through this module of becoming trauma attuned?
Thank you, Claire. I just want to say how lovely it is for me to be here too. And yeah, I feel a real like resilience in the weaving that we've done over the years, and just that sense of like crafting together in a new turning of the spiral feels really rich and lovely. So I'm, yeah, really glad to be here and to be stepping towards as things fall apart. Which is just such a, I don't know, a delicious uh, phenomenon that's coming towards us, you know, this opportunity to spend a really, really good chunk of time together as a group. And really, yeah, take our time looking at so many different things. But, you know, in this first module, mm, and it is so important that it's the first module, in my view, because the body is a gateway and the nervous system is a gateway to the body. So if we want to be creating communities and cultures and work it out in the world from a more connected place, then it's essential that our bodies are part of that journey, which means that we do need to become trauma attuned. So I'd love to speak to that phrase. Why trauma attuned? Because a lot of people are interested in things being trauma informed, which in my view is a great first step, but it can still be a little bit cerebral, you know, if we start understanding trauma, you know, from a purely technical viewpoint. It's great. It can create more compassion within us for the human experience. Um, but it doesn't make us start to form the connections within ourselves and do the kind of work to make inroads into ourselves to sense and feel how our own nervous systems are relating to the world. And in my view, that for most of us involves a certain degree of trauma. And I'll speak more to that in a moment. So, being trauma attuned to me is about um, taking the time to cultivate the presence within ourselves and within our own embodied experience so that we can really acknowledge our own shifting states of connection or defense, because that's really the decision that our nervous system is making on our behalf. It's really trying to help, but it's really making that call as to whether I'm oriented towards connection or defense in any given moment. And we that's something that we really just need to feel. We can't um, think our way into that question. We need to feel our way into that question. And that's why it's very transformational to do the work to become trauma attuned, because in order to become so, we have to be present with ourselves on a moment by moment basis in a slightly different way. Um, so I could say more about that, but Claire, I'm just wondering if there's anything sparking for you that you'd want to speak to, or would you like, shall I follow a meandering path?
You keep on, if you've got, if there's a path to follow, keep on going and I'll chip in afterwards.
Okay.
Um,
So, so why, I mean, trauma, I think we've reached a point where many of us don't have the same kind of resistance or maybe instinctive pushing away to this word trauma that we may have done in previous decades. I think the collective discourse has moved to a point, at least in sort of change-making circles, where we've acknowledged that trauma is something we need to understand and pay attention to. But nonetheless, it can feel really vulnerable to ask ourselves to start to feel, you know, our own nervous systems, moods, patterns, and start to maybe acknowledge even to ourselves the life experiences that might have shaped and conditioned our nervous system patterns. That can feel like a really tender place to go. So it's really important to me to say at the get-go that we're doing this, we're entering into this vulnerable, slightly vulnerable territory, because when we do so, there's so much that we reclaim. So it can, when people think about trauma, it can feel like, oh God, like, do I have to just think about painful stuff a lot more? There's enough painful stuff going on. Do I need to look for where it lives in my own body, really? And so the reason we're doing that is because, and in this module particularly, is because when we start to sense and feel our nervous system more, we start to reclaim aspects of our human nature that are otherwise hidden from view. So, when you start to learn about trauma, you learn that what it is it's a block to integration. And integration meaning like the natural and wholesome ways that our body and our psyche connect up our experience in meaningful ways, moment by moment. And that's not just like on the kind of solely psychological level. That's really actually a physiological thing that happens within our nervous system. Connections are constantly forming, getting pruned, changing, depending on how we are integrating our experience. And when we start to learn about the ways that maybe integration has been blocked or wounded in our own body, we start to also learn what helps integration and how what our system needs to release the past, and not just the personal past, but the collective past. You actually, by going in there to that vulnerable territory, you come out the other side with a way better understanding of what change actually means, personally and collectively. And so that's such an important starting place for our program, is to have that felt sense understanding and actually do a little bit of that transformation together. There's always more layers, even if you're someone who's done a lot of work. Um, there are always more layers to uncover. And also the power of getting to do that within a group context is it just sort of amplifies things hugely. It can, in some cases, it can amplify challenges that you might experience because most of the wounding we carry is relational. So being in a relational context can amplify some of the tenderness, um, but the opportunity to understand what our historic patterns might be, and the opportunity to change those, and the opportunity to create a co-regulating container, um, is really, really precious. So yeah, so in terms of um, the importance, the preciousness of becoming trauma attuned, um, it's such a beautiful positioning at the start of our journey together, because then it gives so much information that you'll be able to carry forward in terms of what are the resiliences you bring to your own life experience in the group. What are the challenges that you're carrying? What are your sore spots that the group can maybe hold with you? Because ultimately, the change that we want to make it collectively. We don't want to make change in the world that just benefits one or two of us. We want to really understand what it means to bring each other along in a good way. So, the final thing I'll say about that is that when we start to understand the dynamics of trauma versus integration in our own body mind, we can start to really see more clearly the cultural dynamics that feed into our internal experience and vice versa. We start to get a better idea of the place that some of the huge inequalities in our society come from, and the sort of internal states that reinforce those external patterns. So, so the other thing that we receive by becoming trauma attuned is a particular lens on culture. Um, so once again, as you move forward through the program, and into the world, and living in the world the whole time, it'll give you a different sense of access to change, and a different sense of the leverage points for change that exist in the world, that are really just kind of fractals of these patterns that we carry in ourselves. Um, so the becoming trauma attuned is such an important place to start when we are also wanting to understand where our society needs a little bit of healing, or quite a lot of healing too.
Mm, beautiful, thank you. I'm always very touched by the way that you inherently kind of just interweave the personal and the collective, and that the kind of cultural perspective has always been so, essential for you. And I wouldn't say that's necessarily true of a lot of those who specialize around healing and transforming trauma, you being someone who that is, your speciality. And so it's, really touching that that's always been the lens. And in a lot of ways, how can it be anything else, right? How can it really, as you say, it's like we've been so conditioned by modernity, by power over, to kind of experience a separation between the personal and collective, when in actual fact there is no separation. And a lot of what As Things Fall Apart is about is that kind of healing of that severance between this kind of sense of the personal and the collective. um yeah, gosh, there's so much that I'd love to kind of riff off, so I'll see where it takes me. um yeah, one of the things that I was just sort of really feeling my kind of yes to as you were speaking was this, how important it feels, I know, in both of our experiences, to kind of really recognize how the creation of our cultural container, our group container, is so important on any kind of collective journey endeavor. And how often that bit gets sort of neglected because we're in a rush and we've got there's a particular intention for a group. And so we can often skip over the importance of that kind of creation of the container. And that, this becoming trauma attuned is just such an integral part of that container. It's like if we are learning to kind of hone this muscle that allows us to become trauma attuned, for us to actually kind of regulate our beings, co-regulate our beings, our bodies, our nervous systems with other beings and bodies, then everything is transformed. It's like the kind of the safety that tends to then just naturally reveal itself, because at a nervous system level, often in my experience, at a nervous system level, participants kind of are almost kind of quite shocked at the level of safety that is possible simply by weaving in this invisible force that is becoming trauma attuned. And it's kind of like a magic ingredient that in a lot of ways our beings have always been longing for, and very few of us got met as children, infants, or at any point in our lives. And so to suddenly find ourselves in a container that is being very intentionally held in a trauma attuned way, can just that in itself, can be so deeply transformative in my experience. in, in many of the groups that I've both kind of held and participated in. So yeah, so this is why we're dedicating the first module to this, becoming trauma attuned, and how that plays into creating the cultural container. So I love, how you've spoken to the sort of the intricacies of that. And the other thing that was coming to me as I was listening to you, and you were so beautifully sort of speaking of how when we do lean into becoming trauma attuned, and when we do start to become resourced enough, and there's enough safety in our system for trauma to start to kind of titrate through us, move through us, that we get to reclaim and integrate kind of aspects of our wholeness, our inherent wholeness, that have been exiled, and have been shut down by these defense strategies. And so that, for me, this is something of this term that I included in the invitation, and something that I speak about a lot, which is trauma as a wild ally. It's like it's an ally to reclaiming our wildness, our inherent wildness, that is that wholeness, that is that aliveness that has been so dampened down and shut down in our bodies over millennia, by collective intergenerational ancestral trauma. And so there's something of this, trauma as wild ally, in that it's our ally, and of course that's not to minimalize how grueling, the journey of healing trauma can be, and for some, and yet the gold, the gifts that, if we are lucky enough, blessed enough, privileged enough to receive support, to be able to heal and transform trauma as it starts to reveal itself through us. I mean, the gifts that it, is it gifts us with are just phenomenal in my experience, and I see it around me in those that are on that journey. The resilience that is created in terms of working this muscle that allows us to play host to deep vulnerability and deep fear, and it's the antidote to this kind of almost generalized protective strategy in modernity to defend, like you said, and to feel like we need to control, and to control everything. And trauma, basically, to heal trauma, the only way you can do that is to develop your muscle around tolerating not being in control, and playing host to fear and to vulnerability. And in my experience, at least, and those that, the many people I kind of have these conversations with or support, it's like the kind of the medicine poison of trauma is that it kind of leaves you no choice but to actually work this muscle to be able to tolerate more vulnerability and more fear and less control. And the freedom that actually brings into our being is phenomenal. So yeah, there's this kind of bittersweetness that, even though there's a kind of natural bracing against, like, oh no, I don't want to go there, the reality is that if we are able to receive the support in this healing journey, then what that then gives us access to is just phenomenal. And not just to us personally, it's like, on one level, like what we then are able to gift in group spaces when we have done enough of this healing trauma, the way that we show up in relationships and groups is in and of itself so much more healing for the group space. And it's almost kind of contagious, it's like it does by osmosis. It kind of helps create a field that is so inherently healing. So at a human level, it's like, us doing that healing and transforming trauma work automatically starts to infuse, our relationships and group fields. But also, in my experience, it's like the journey of healing and transforming trauma through becoming trauma attuned, it opens us up to the more than human. It opens us up to kind of, so that our connection, it's like we get to remember ourselves, to be remembered as this inherent wider web of life that isn't just human. So it expands us from the kind of human-centric lens into, okay, there's so much more, and we get to then viscerally experience the kind of inherent interconnectivity and the invisible threads that connect us. And our nervous systems ultimately are those invisible threads, that are connected into this golden web of life. That, to think that our nervous system is just ours, as soon as we start to become more trauma attuned, it's like, oh my goodness, I'm plugged in. I'm plugged into this invisible golden web, and there are kind of dark tangles, where it's got blocked. But, by leaning into becoming trauma attuned, it's like the dark tangles start to unravel. And before we know it, we get glimpses, glimmerings in the luminous dark of what's possible. So yeah, so for me, this trauma as wild ally is a really important frame, because it reclaims the realms of trauma from this kind of thing to be avoided, and that, a thing that only broken people have, or, sort of, and it can elicit kind of either pity, or it can elicit a kind of almost wanting to avoid, and it's like, hang on, what if trauma revealing itself through me, it is not just mine? What if it belongs to way more than just me? What if it's something that's been inherited, across generations and through the collective, um, in life's longing to heal and transform and expand through us? What if that is what trauma is actually up to? And what if that is exactly why, in these times, so many more of us are playing host to so much more trauma revealing itself through us? Like, what if that actually is life's longing for healing? What if what if trauma is exactly what is on life's co-evolutionary edge now? What if evolution is trauma? And the more safety that comes into our system, so the more work we do to resource ourselves, the more trauma can move through us and allow us to reclaim, our wholeness, which is a gift to the world. And yeah, this kind of piece around, us being wild allies, rather than, again, kind of the sense of we're here to rescue in some sort of white saviorism kind of way. It's like, no, if we lean into becoming trauma attuned, um, it's like we're all in this together. Like, there aren't the broken ones and the kind of more together ones. It's like we're all in this together. It lives in all of our bodies. So yeah, that's kind of some of what is brought alive in me as I hear you. So I wonder if, in what I've shared, it's ignited any other threads you want to kind of tug on.
Yes, please. Thank you. Um, yeah, it's such a beautiful, what I'm just really enjoying from your words, it's such a beautiful paradox, the fact that becoming trauma attuned is actually becoming life attuned. It's like we think what we're attuning to is trauma, but actually it's life calling to us, um, and calling to us, to restore our place in this golden web, as you've described it. Such a beautiful image. And I've heard so many people speak about their own healing journey as a process of becoming ever more receptive to a kind of intelligence that is so beyond the individual. It's like, as we do kind of encounter and embrace and restore some of these darker parts in our nervous systems, it's like this different information becomes available to us about what it means to be alive, what it means to be a human, what it means to be a citizen on Earth with all of the other beings that we share this planet with. So that sense of being really connected is such a gift, and is something that comes through this work. Um, I was also thinking to say that we hold this, and I can speak for us, I think, in this, because we've held this space together. We hold this space, and it's so important to, in an intersectionally informed way, because when you're looking at histories of trauma, intergenerational trauma, there are differences in the lineages that we carry. And I mean, ultimately, we're all human beings that will be in this course, but in the recent, more recent history times, there have been very particular lineages of trauma that are really important to acknowledge, um, that impact, what that journey might be like for each one of us, as we open to our nervous systems and maybe to a more co-regulating environment, there isn't an expectation that that journey will be the same for everybody. And there's a real, respect and honoring for people's thresholds and boundaries. Um, so, it wouldn't be a trauma-attuned module if anybody were forced to to be a certain way or pushed beyond what feels like an appropriate boundary. Um, yeah, and that's a really important thing to me to say up front that we honor. Um, Given, you know, my intersectionality and the intersectionality of Claire, we're coming from particular biases and histories, just like every one of us. And we do the work to understand those histories so that we can acknowledge them consciously and do whatever we can do to hold a respectful space for difference. Um, so that felt like an important thing to name around how we enter into this space.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for naming that. Funnily enough, just as I handed over to you, I was scribbling down some notes that kind of were on a similar thread. So yeah,
Mm,
really great to include this piece. It feels so essential to kind of actually just name. It's like the current guiding team for As Things Fall Apart. We are three white-bodied beings, and it doesn't pass us by at all to kind of be like, well, just that could be enough for some people to feel like it's not for them, and so I just want to really name that there's a consciousness around that and what's missed as a result of that, and from my side of things, coordinating and pulling together as things fall apart, I'm really holding a kind of curiosity around who will the guiding team end up being, and it will include more diversity than is currently here, and will be very shaped around the participants that end up being part of this cohort.
mm,
But I just don't want to skip over that. And even that, it's like there's a reality of the way that As Things Fall Apart so far has been shaped is through white-bodied people, so there's something of like just really being upfront about the limitation of that, no matter how much work we're all doing to compost modernity through us, to compost whiteness through us. There is a reality that our lived experience is being conditioned into whiteness, and many other threads, within modernity and power over. So yeah, I just want to be clear about that. And there's something of this kind of recognition again when it comes to healing trauma. And I'm aware that we've spoken a lot in the conversation so far about the kind of gifts and the exhilaration that comes from healing trauma. And I just also want to add in that I don't want to minimalize how grueling that journey can be for some people. It's like, or not just for some people. I mean, certainly in both of our experiences, we know the grit and the gruel. We've been both on this journey for a long, well over a decade. And we've both been on our knees with it, and we'll probably continue to be, because that's the nature of healing trauma. And so I don't want to minimalize the challenge and how hard it is. And for any of those who are listening to us now who are in the depths of healing trauma and are on your knees, just wanting to say we get it, to the degree that we're on that journey. And for me, one of the things that feels just like a kind of almost unfathomable gift in terms of As Things Fall Apart is the fact that it's been generously funded so that we can offer it as a pay what you can afford offering, so that it makes it more accessible to those that wouldn't normally be able to receive this support. Because it feels so palpable to me that in these times, with trauma revealing itself so much more through so many more of us, there is such a divisiveness in those that can access and afford support and those that can't, and that sucks. That really sucks. And it feels like, I know for both of us, it's like such a commitment to be doing what we can to make support as available as possible, and because it is such a game changer, whether we get that support or not. So there is a real hope that as things fall apart, we'll, be able to support those that wouldn't normally be able to, without, being naive enough to think that simply having it as a pay what you can afford means that it suddenly will become accessible to everyone. So yeah, but it's both and. Yeah. Mm. I'm wondering if you've got any last kind of closing thoughts, remarks, inquiries you want to land.
Yeah, just wanting to say, I think as I'm sat here, I'm really aware of the privilege that we have. You and me and the people who may be joining us on this program to be able to look at trauma in this way. So I think, it's been implied, I appreciated what you just shared about like that trauma itself is no party, but also just having the relative safety at this moment to unpack trauma with care and depth, and to be able to restore some of our capacities, some of our human capacities for connection is itself a huge privilege, given what so many people are suffering right now around the planet, where that is not, a way that trauma can be held, in crisis zones, in war, in, yeah, situations of violence. It's not possible to look at trauma through this lens because it's happening, it's fresh, it's alive, and it's overwhelming in that moment. And so I just want to give a moment to just acknowledge the people who are suffering right now in such an urgent and huge way. And at the same time, to offer thanks that, at least in this moment, we can do a little bit of healing on behalf of ourselves and the collective. And may that serve the good of all.
Mm. Beautiful. Thank you for bringing that in. That feels such an important piece to include. And it feels to me like there's a grapple that we all need to be in around kind of how we relate with that reality. It's like, how do we relate with the inevitable sense of urgency with what's happening, what's unfolding on the world stage, and those of us with relative privilege, it's like, how do we grapple with, the parts of us that want to be really self-sacrificial and kind of feel like, well, the only way I can help is to suffer as much, and it's not okay to be on my healing journey. And it's like, how do we find our way with that, and recognize it's not one or the other, and that there isn't a solution, but there is this ongoing grapple, and
Mm.
ultimately our hearts being cracked open and resourcing ourselves, those of us that have been born into this lifetime with relative privilege. It's like, so much of the work at Starter Culture that we're offering is, how do we use that power and privilege in ways that are in service of composting power over, so that, as we move forward, that inequality and that injustice and is, and the suffering that it creates is no longer so profound. I'm not sure that it's going to disappear in our lifetime, but we can certainly hope that, through the work that's being done to compost power over by those that do have relative privilege, is contributing to a dismantling of a system that ultimately is the underbelly of the atrocities and horrors that we're seeing playing out on the world stage at the moment. So yeah, it feels like such an important thread to weave in, is this grapple, this, there isn't a solution, but there certainly is an intention to kind of really um, disrupt the underbelly that kind of leads to this massive inequality and, around privilege. Yeah, yeah. Mm. Well,
Thank you.
yeah, this has been, as ever, a really rich conversation down a number of kind of kaleidoscopic rabbit holes, which is one of the things that I love about our conversations. And yeah, I kind of feel like we need to have many more because we've only scratched the surface with this one. But yeah, so yeah, for those of you watching, We have another Zoom Q&A session coming up on the 6th of August that will be with myself and Madeleine and Sarah McFarland, who's also part of the current guide team. That's yes, Wednesday the 6th of August from 7 till 8:30 BST. We'll pop into the notes with this video kind of links as to find out how to find out more information about As Things Fall Apart more generally, as well as how to register for that Zoom Q&A if you are interested in applying to join us. And just a reminder that the deadline to apply, there's still plenty of time. 17th of August is the last day to apply for As Things Fall Apart. And again, all of the information will pop into the kind of notes with this video. But yeah, for those of you that have been listening in and got this far, thank you for your time and your attention, and yeah, all that you're doing in your lives to kind of have got to a point where this is interesting to you, you know, and to give up your time to consider being part of As Things Fall Apart. Yeah.